Are you a doctor trying to elevate your practice and make your impact on the world long lasting? Ready to go from a hustler to a CEO? Man, you already know. Welcome to the Michael Buffington Show, the podcast that's transforming the lives of doctors. You ready? Let's go.
It's 1:37 a.m. on a Sunday morning when the phone rings. Kind of startles me, as it normally would any of us at 1:37 a.m. And I pick it up and I say, hello, like, Michael Buffington? Yes, this is Michael. We need you to come get him. In this instant, I knew what that meant. And I said, what do you mean you need me to come get him? They're like, we've got a situation. We need you to come get him. I'm 45 minutes away. We understand. Get here as fast as you can. Now let me back up for a second. I'm Michael Buffington. I'm a farm boy, country boy, self-proclaimed anyway, from north central Missouri, who's been in chiropractic practice for 29 years. I had a high-producing practice, saw a lot of people, got the opportunity to take care of a lot of people in my career, had a lot of income from that, not just top-line income, but overheads in the 35 to all the way down to 18% at my peak when I was earning over 7 figures annually. I'm currently a director for Curious Functional Health on the chiropractic side. I see a lot of clinics, I see a lot of providers, I see a lot of things. I've also coached and consulted really for years. For a long time, I would say it was pro bono. Then it was with a partner for a couple years. And then beyond that, since 2017, I've had Game Changer out on my own, helping specifically male chiropractors level up their business game. So life and business are super important to me. And that's how it relates back to this phone call, and why I want to bring value to you, because in that moment, it was a catalyst moment that changed everything in my life. And if you're at all like me, you probably have a few of those moments that you remember in your life. I know I have more than one, and I'll talk about more than one as this show continues, not this particular episode, but as I continue to dive into these shows with you and talk to you about the frameworks and how I survived, but not only survived, how did I thrive, and how did I help my family thrive, and how did I help my businesses thrive through these situations that, like it or not, we all encounter. So we're back to this point of the phone ringing, me answering. I hang up the phone. I turn in bed. My wife's already, of course, awake and aware of what's going on, because just earlier that day, I had taken my oldest son to a facility to help him. He was going through challenges, and at that point, we didn't know the difference between some brain health things versus substance things to what it was. And this was not a new road for us. It had been something that had been going on and that we'd been battling a little bit over the last couple of years. But this was the summer of 2014, to give you a context and a stamp in time. And I had just gotten him into a facility, written a significant check, 5 figures, and not just barely 5 figures, mid 5 figures, to help him over about a 10-day to 2-week period to see if we could take the next steps again. And so I'm thankful to have the ability to do that, but that's what was going on. And in that moment, I said, I've got to go. She understood. We had 2 little boys upstairs, and I was out the door on the phone with my sister, calling my sister and saying, hey, can you help me out? Granted, it's the middle of the night, but what does she say? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm coming by, because it's kind of on my way, and I'm coming by fast, and I need you to get duct tape. I need you to get rope. You have rope? Get that, please. Do you have any zip ties? And maybe a towel or 2. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, just don't ask. I'll explain on the way. And I proceeded to get her, pick her up at her house, and continue to the facility. And when I pulled up the facility, through the security gate, I get buzzed in, and I see the lights, and I see the sheriff's car, ambulance, multiple cars, lights on, and just a lot of commotion going on. And I walk in the doors, and of course, everybody was looking for me. Everybody was waiting for me. And they're like, you've got to help us. We can't do anything in this scenario. And I won't get into the scene of the situation beyond that, but there was just a lot happening. I really coaxed and bribed and talked my way, which was challenging to do, to have my son come out of the area where he was and allow everybody else to resume to what they should be doing in that moment, and exit and get him out of the building. The first objective. Second objective, to get him in an ambulance. And then once in the ambulance, it was like, all right, let's check you a little bit. And they checked, and his blood pressure was 190 over about 115 or 120. I don't remember the exact number. I just remember the EMT looking at me like, wow. Okay, so this is a guy who isn't on any substance at the moment. Okay, he's not got any meds in his system to do this. Yet his blood pressure for a extremely fit guy at the time is through the roof. And so they begin the transport. I think I followed the ambulance. I'm not even really sure what I followed, or they followed me. That part's a little bit of a blur. And we ended up in the hospital, a nearby hospital. And when we came in, they knew we were coming, and they knew it was going to be a situation. So I met with hospital security. Was at the door, and everybody to try to help us out in that moment. And in that moment too, they were trying to take care of everything they could. These people were up against it, we'll say, under the certain scenario. And what proceeded to take place from, let's call it 2:30 in the morning and until 10 o'clock the next day, I could tell you and continue to talk to you for literally days to explain those hours, what went on for the people around me, what went on for me internally and emotionally, what went on for the people in my family that were not there, what went on for the people that, until they actually see this podcast, never knew, don't know, had no clue, and that's okay too. Because it was never about not telling people. It was about trying not to negatively impact other people with something that, quite frankly, you've got to handle on your own. And that's where this is going to tie back to you through the course of this, or I sure want it to bring value to you in this. It's the only reason for me to bring these things out and put it out in the open. I'm not bashful about it, okay with any judgments about it, okay with all of it, because trust me, I've already lived it. So talking about it here is not quite like living it, although right now, if you could feel my chest, you would feel the heartbeat is far off of my normal pace, and I've got that cold hands and sweat, probably a little too much information, a little sweat in my arms right now, just because it takes me back there and ramps me up, just like in that moment where I had to be almost in that state to just deal with the ER physician, which I had a lot of disagreements with, very heated discussions with plenty of adjectives. So he and I were not seeing eye to eye. Staff was in a really tough situation trying to help out. Security guard, John, big guy, like several, probably 6 inches and 100 pounds bigger than me. John was doing his best, and he was a calm mountain of a man. Reminded me of John Coffey in The Green Mile. He's like that kind of guy, big but gentle, but yet you just didn't really want to mess with him if you didn't have to. So John and I were trying to get along, and the whole time, manage what was going on for my son, which was not easy, which involved a lot of chaos, was creating a lot of chaos in the department, in that ER. So much so that as the night went on, the local PD was called in to help assist the hospital security, and we continued on through this for hours and hours, unable to calm things down, unable to assess things differently, only to confirm that there were no substances at play here, which I knew because I knew where he had been, but there was something else physiologically going on that maybe at that point was unexplainable. Not so much now, but unexplainable then. And we continued until about 10 a.m., where I stood in a private room with a plainclothes judge standing toe-to-toe, talking to me about what the hospital was going to have to do and how they were going to have to make a release because they didn't have any ability to hold. And because of the age, he just crossed over the age. Again, this is 2014, to where if you've ever been in these kind of situations, as a parent, it's challenging when your kids are no longer, or they are considered adults. You have very limited rights. You have very limited impact on what you can do. So here we were, and I was having a discussion, we'll call it, with the judge. And he was explaining the law, and I was explaining how much I didn't give a shit about the law in that moment. And I didn't care how this went down, didn't care how they figured it out, didn't care anything about it. I cared about one thing, and that result was he being my son, was not going out the door. He cannot go out the door. We all know what's going to happen if he goes out the door. And it's going to be the final time he goes out the door. And that was the story that was true to me, and I don't believe it to be a story. In my mind, still to this day, that was the reality. So I knew what was on the line. And here we are at that point, because of the time of the day, other than maybe a short nap before 1:37 a.m. in the morning, I'm going on 30 hours. A lot of people going on very little sleep. Somehow, they pull a rabbit out of their hat and find a way. And I was able to stand there and push and force and compel for people to find a way. And it's really one of the 4 pillars, I'll say. There's more pillars than that, but I really focus on 4 pillars when I'm doing anything in life and business. And that those are pillars that were taught to me and that I iterate out for myself, and as well as strip these things down when it comes to chiropractors, especially chiropractic businessmen who are doing some of the same things that I was doing. Hopefully not this piece, but everybody's got their stuff. Everybody's got their piece, right? So, and that is power, production, profit, and protection. Because in those times like this, I had to be able to stand in a powerful position. And I'm not talking about bowing up. I'm not talking about that kind of power. I'm talking about fatigued, emotionally wrung out, spiritually challenged, physically, like not a lot of gas in the tank, but finding a way to have the necessary conversations, finding a way to have the collisions that were required to get what I wanted and what I believed needed to have happen against all odds. Also in that, the production piece allowed the check to be written in the first place, and it allowed all of these things to occur. Without the check, and I feel so distraught. I was so distraught back then, thinking about what do people do that don't have the financial means to hit this head on? What do they do? In my mind, I felt like I know what happens, and it's a sad thing. So I was very grateful, but I also am challenged always to help my doctors go, you have to produce for your family, okay? Just being a servant alone, that does not mean you have to be a poor servant. That doesn't mean that you cannot make money. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't protect your money. It doesn't mean that you should not profit in the process. But first, before either of those, you have to be able to produce it, because it creates opportunities and it does help with problems. We all know that money will not solve problems. In some cases, right, it just amplifies them. But it'll just make you more of what you already are. If you've ever heard that, that is true. But in this case, it gave me a shot. It gave me a leg up. It created a window of opportunity because of the work done, because of the people served, because of the business skills that I had acquired to put me in that spot. And that's key here, because ultimately at the end of the day, there were so many collateral damages with this. And just this little snippet of time, I had 2 little boys at home. They were still home that night when we left. They still had a childhood that they were, living and growing up. I had a wife who was amazingly supportive, but she was along for the ride as well. She was there every step of the way, whether she was physically there in the moment or whether she was there with me, just trying to keep me together. And that's what I really wanted to get to here, because what occurred in this moment, and it's good to be able to come back and talk about in the future. I'll talk about where we are now, and you can take some lessons from that and some application into your own world. But the lesson for me in this, and how did this turn out to be worst day, best day? Have you ever heard that? Like, how do you turn your worst day, one of your worst days, into your best day?